Hello and welcome. I'm Bob Cusack, Editor-in-Chief at The Hill. Thank you for joining us for day 2 of A More Perfect Union, our multi-day festival where we will explore and celebrate America's best big ideas through the lens of American reinvention. Throughout our virtual summit, we're bringing together political leaders, entrepreneurs, policy innovators, and disruptors to discuss some of the most urgent issues of our time. Today's program is all about reinventing the American economy with a special focus on small business and e-commerce. How are record inflation, supply chain bottlenecks, and labor shortages affecting businesses? E-commerce sales exploded during COVID-19. So what is the future outlook of digital retail? And how can technology as a whole encourage business growth? We'll be discussing these topics today and much more. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Altria, for its support of this program. And as a reminder, we're bringing you multiple sessions of programming today and tomorrow. You can watch them all or tune in to specific segments. Go to our website, thehill.com/events, for all the details. A few housekeeping notes before we get going. You can tweet us at @TheHillEvents using the hashtag #TheHillAMPU. And if you experience any trouble with the live stream, please refresh the page. That should be a quick fix. To kick us off today with his outlook on the American economy is the 12th president of the American Enterprise Institute, Robert Doar. He previously served 20 years in leadership positions in the social service programs of New York State and New York City. Robert, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with a broad question on the economy. Where is the economy now, in the wake of COVID-19, and where do you see the challenges going forward into the new year and beyond?
Well, I think it's in a very precarious situation right now with interest rates rising and that putting pressure on the economy. I think too many Americans are still on the sidelines outside of the labor force and not coming back into work when work is available. I think we're providing too much really government assistance to subsidize that inactivity. So I think there are some real headwinds in our face that we're going to have to face up to in the coming months. Now, having said that, I have an enormous amount of confidence in the American economy and the American people, and I like the way that you opened the show. We are a great country. We can do great things, but we have to get out of our own way. We have to regulate less. We have to promote work more and reduce the extent to which we subsidize inactivity or people staying out of the labor force because they are receiving government benefits. So those are a number of things we can do, but we are definitely facing a difficult next year. And I think if we stay confident in who we are and not retreat to protectionism and even further regulation and greater taxes and greater government intervention, we'll come out of it stronger. And I think stronger than the rest of the world, stronger than China, stronger than Europe. We have great assets, great people. We also need more people. And we have to find ways to get families to form and raise children. And we also need to resolve our immigration problem so that we're attracting the best and the brightest from around the world.
If you look at polls, even before the pandemic, there was a fair amount of pessimism, which still exists today, and we've written about this, about the American dream. Is the American dream still achievable? And what changes? I know you mentioned a couple things, but specifically, why is that pessimistic view, and what can policymakers do to make people more optimistic? Yes, you can have the American dream, but a lot of people think it's just not achievable now.
Well, I think we tell them that from the commanding heights of our culture, our universities, our media, and I think it isn't always true. To some extent, the left or the Democratic Party has an interest in telling Americans that they can't get ahead if they work, and the only really solution for them is greater government assistance and greater government benefit programs. And I don't really believe that's true. Our scholars at AEI show persistently that people born in the bottom quintile do make it to the middle and up to the top at rates that we don't hear enough about, greater rates than you'd expect just listening to the media. So I absolutely believe the American dream is still alive. It does require work. It does require effort. It requires acquiring skills. But when you do that, the American economy offers more opportunity than I think any other economy in the world.
Robert, obviously, last couple of years, we've had a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate, and we have Joe Biden in the White House. Now that's about to change in the new year. House Republicans did win the lower chamber narrowly, but they will be in control. Could be an interesting speaker vote. But what do you think now that House Republicans are going to have subpoena power? They're going to have oversight power, and that's something Kevin McCarthy, the possible, maybe likely speaker, has said, is that we need to do this oversight, and we need to do it early in the year, so we need to get beyond the speaker vote. But overall, what do you think the House Republicans should do as far as using those oversight powers?
Well, I'm not a great believer in the frivolous use of the oversight powers. And some of this talk of investigations, I think, is a waste of time and a kind of performative politics, which has really damaged our public policy processes in the United States. The Republican House would be wise to get serious, to do a lot of things that show some seriousness. I noticed today that he appointed Mike Gallagher as the head of a special committee on China. That's a sign of seriousness. I think there's an opportunity for more of that kind of activity where we're looking at tough problems. We're trying to solve them in a nonpartisan way, trying to solve them in a way consistent with American values, freedom, free markets, limited government, but that we aren't just trying to score political points and aren't still constantly trying to embarrass the president of the United States. That's not helpful. And the American people, I think, in this last election showed that they don't want that either. And I'm hoping that Speaker McCarthy, or Speaker-to-be McCarthy, gets that message and really celebrates the serious people in his conference who want to tackle tough problems in a way that brings us together as a country.
You know, divided government is coming, and you know, in prior years, certainly a lot has been accomplished. Certainly, even rivals like former Speaker Newt Gingrich and former President Clinton were able to agree on the Balanced Budget Act despite their tension, impeachment, and all that. You know, in recent years, from a macro sense, you see the Trump tax law being passed without any Democrats. You've seen Obamacare passed without any Republicans. Going into 2023, and to be fair, in this Congress, there was some bipartisanship. There was a mental health, there was a gun bill, there was a transportation bill that got through.
Infrastructure bill.
Yeah, that was big. That was big, and that's being implemented now. But what do you see on the horizon of a potential bipartisanship in the new year?
Well, I think there's some hope, possibly, that they could do something on entitlements. In some small fixes now that will have no effect on current retirees or even retirees, people coming up on retirement soon, but look a little further down the line that could take us a step back from the sort of deficit debt problem we have. I also think there's some hope on international trade in an effort to impose regulations or tariff even, or a border adjustment tax on products coming from countries that have not made the changes necessary to have a cleaner environment or a cleaner climate. So I think there's a lot of talk about that in Congress. I think there's some hope that those kinds of things could get done. But I also hope that they don't do more damage. I mean, the key thing is that we find a way to try to hold the line on spending. We don't raise taxes, and we don't add to the benefit spending that, in my opinion, has kept people out of the labor force because they're receiving more than they would get from work, from government benefits. Some people are working very hard and getting a certain amount of money, and other people are working not at all and getting almost the same amount of money. And that doesn't seem fair to Americans. It's not good for our economy, and it's not good for the people that are receiving those benefits and staying out of work, because there are enormous benefits to being employed that help people move up and advance their families. So I think there'll be some opportunities for positive progress, but I also worry about doing more damage by adding to the spending that I think is slowing our economy.
I wanted to follow up on that. Well, you mentioned a couple issues. First, I want to talk about trade. You know, trade certainly took a hit with the rise of Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. Do you think it's going to make a comeback? Because, as you know, it dominated the campaign trail in 2016, and trade deals that were in discussion didn't really happen.
I'm glad you raised it. I completely agree. I think we're in a bad place with regard to trade. And I had some hope that President Biden would roll back some of the excesses of the Trump administration And my conversations with Democrats who are positive about trade say that they are disappointed in it and they don't think he's going to do it. But a lot depends on him. Trade is very much informed by presidential leadership, and trade can be so beneficial to our economy. And President Biden could do, I think, the country a lot of help the country in a great way if he would find ways to reignite the trade that's been good for America and good for our trading partners around the world. And I'm not talking about backsliding on being tough with China. I'm talking about just a more open and free trade policy that allows our country to grow.
Last question, Robert. I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot. I know you like to read biographies. Can you think of a biography or a person that maybe Congress and policymakers in Washington should emulate? Because we've got, as you mentioned, big issues coming down the pike. Medicare, Social Security, they're headed for bankruptcy. Is there anyone that you've learned from reading any particular biography that you think, well, maybe some people should read this book?
Well, David McCullough's Harry Truman is phenomenal, and Harry Truman is a good person for now. We have enormous challenges around the world. We need a strong American president who understands our role in the world and is willing to make efforts to help the world become a more peaceful and stable place. So I think, and the other thing is he was often very unpopular. He faced a hostile Congress, but he kept his head. He kept trying to make progress where he could. He was always a straight shooter. I would bone up on Harry Truman a little bit right now if I were Joe Biden, and I think it would do him well.
Yeah, no, that's good advice. Maybe he'll listen. Robert Doar, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Small business owners answered the challenges brought by the pandemic with a spirit of reinvention. Here to speak to this and the future of small business is Karen Kerrigan, the president and CEO of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council. Karen, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Bob.
Well, as you know, Karen, in the beginning of every year, the president addresses Congress and the nation, and he gives his State of the Union address. I'd like you to kind of give what you think the state of small business is, especially in the wake of the pandemic.
Well, they're challenged. They certainly have grinded it out, over the last 3 years or so. And, but they're resilient, they're tough, they've pivoted, they've used a lot of the technologies that are out there in order to drive revenues and to compete in a very challenging environment. But they are still challenged by headwinds, Bob, in terms of their revenues being pinched, higher costs, and in fact, not even being able to operate up to full capacity. According to a recent Wall Street Journal Vistage survey, 55% of business owners said they weren't able to operate at full capacity. So, this all has an impact on their bottom line, their ability to compete, and their survivability moving forward. So, on the one hand, there's challenges, but on the other hand, Bob, we're also seeing a lot more people filing business applications and wanting to be a business owner. So, there's a lot of good things ahead for our economy, if policies again, enable this type of entrepreneurial activity and also support the small businesses that are out there.
Karen, you're always talking to small business owners across the country, I'm sure. What do you hear that you think Washington policymakers should hear?
Well, the first thing you want policymakers and Congress and the administration do is to listen to them and give them a voice. And they'll be the first ones to tell them what they need to do. And so they want relief. Certainly they want policies that are not going to burden them with more costs or more regulation. When you look at their policy priorities, whether it's startups, all the pandemic startups that we surveyed, or even existing small businesses that have been around for quite some time, it comes down to the basic and the fundamentals: tax simplicity, tax relief, smart, regulation, affordable health coverage, access to capital, just sort of access to markets, access to labor, sort of the foundational pieces that they need to grow their business and compete in the modern economy. Moreover, there's some great models, that have really worked well in our country, Bob, in terms of paths to entrepreneurship and new business creation. The franchise model, independent contractors, self-employment, our M&A system. These have all been very critical for the whole startup ecosystem, for the business ecosystem, and they want policymakers to do no harm to these very successful models. So there's things happening right now in the regulatory agencies and up on the Hill, that would harm these models. And again, models that have worked very well in terms of building wealth and creating a very vibrant, competitive economy.
Where have you seen small businesses come over the last 5 years, especially with e-commerce and getting online, especially during the pandemic? It was essential for some businesses.
Well, essential. And, the surveys that we've done of not only startups, but existing business owners said that if it wasn't for digital tools, digital platforms, all the modern tools, that are out there, they would not have survived, the COVID economy. And certainly, all these tools have been utilized and embedded across their businesses in order to operate more efficiently and to cut cost and to do things, that they need to be doing in order to survive a very challenging economy. So, but it's very interesting, again, we're looking at another wave of disruption that's going to be upon us in terms of Web 3.0 technologies, the metaverse, all these exciting things that are ahead of us. And that's just going to open up more avenues for entrepreneurship and new businesses, new products and services. So it is an exciting time. And I think the important thing is we need just a very stable and smart policy environment in order to, again, encourage existing business, but also to encourage future investment and innovation that's going to bring all these new technologies and tools to market, not only for small businesses, but for consumers and workers throughout our country, if not the world.
What do you think the new House coming in January, be narrow majority led by the GOP? Are you looking for a more active, whether it's small business committee or other committees, to do more oversight on regulations? Because we haven't seen a lot of that in this Congress.
Well, I think oversight is critical. I mean, certainly, in terms of the regulatory agencies that we think are working overtime and are doing things that are not too helpful for small businesses and our small business economy. So I think oversight is essential at all the agencies, from the DOL to Treasury, the Internal Revenue Service, certainly the Federal Trade Commission that's doing a lot, to what we think disrupt in a bad way the M&A ecosystem, which really will hurt our startup ecosystem, which has been the gem of the world. So definitely oversight is critically important. And we think whatever Congress, if it's run by Democrats or Republicans, should always be doing a lot of oversight. So that is a priority for us, I think. But we would like to see some bipartisan action. There's a lot of consensus on issues and on the priorities of small businesses that we think we could get through this House and get through the Senate. Issues such as capital formation, affordable health coverage choices, possibly some regulatory relief, maybe even some tax reform and permanency, of some of the tax provisions that will expire as part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that have been helpful for small businesses. Yes, oversight is important, and we're going to be cheering that on. But we are also going to be looking for opportunities to advance legislation that we can also get through the Senate and hopefully to the president's desk.
Congress has taken some remedies on the supply chain shortages that we've seen during the pandemic. What are you hearing across the country? Does Congress need to do a lot more in this area, or is what they passed already, you think, is going to be enough?
Well, I certainly think they can be doing more, but sometimes doing more is doing less. So, we think that, the private sector, is the key to resolving our supply chain issues. And that if we just let the private sector does what it does best, and there's policy stability from a tax and regulatory perspective, that's going to drive the investment and going to drive the business activity that we need in order to resolve, the supply chain mess. So it all comes back to incentivizing, the private sector, small, mid-sized, large businesses, the entire business ecosystem, that can develop solutions and, keep on investing so that we do not have any of these supply chain, issues moving forward in 2023. It certainly has gotten better, Bob, but that just might be because the economy has cooled and demand is not as high as it was. But we need to be forward thinking in policy, and that means, supercharging our private sector to invest and, again, to do what it does best, to help us get to make sure the supply chain mess or chaos does not happen again.
Are you confident, because we're in such polarizing times? You mentioned some of the solution can be a combination of things, including tax law and extending pieces of tax law that's already been made, like the Trump tax. Now, obviously, Democrats don't like that bill or that law, but they want other things. Do you think that we're in a situation with divided government that maybe, just maybe, there's actually going to be more bipartisanship in the new year than is anticipated, and the the expectation is very little?
Bob, I think the margins are slim on both sides, of the Capitol, right? Both in the House and the Senate. And then we have another election, that's going to happen, in 2 more years. So I think politically, there should be some incentive for both sides of the aisle to get things done. And so I've been at this for almost 30 years now, and I'm an eternal optimist. And, we've been able to get through, legislation, really good pieces of legislation for small business in Democrat administrations and Republican administrations. And, we did have a mix of political power in the Congress. So I am optimistic, and I just hope that members do the right thing and do what's best for our economy and for the business sector, and again, not play a lot of political games, because too much is at stake for our economy and U.S. leadership across the globe.
There certainly is a lot at stake. Karen Kerrigan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Bob. It was great to be with you today.
And now a short message from our sponsor, Altria.
What does business transformation mean at Altria, and how does that translate to building innovation capabilities?
The tobacco industry is changing, and for the better. The future of our industry really is about innovation, harm reduction, and informed consumer choice. So at Altria, we're focusing our tremendous resources and our very talented people on reducing the risk of tobacco products while expanding choices for adult consumers. And that's really important because today over 20 million U.S. adult smokers are seeking less harmful alternatives to cigarettes. So it's a pivotal moment with adult smoker demand for non-combustible alternatives, innovation, and an appropriate regulatory framework. We really have an opportunity to transform Altria and our industry. And so our vision is to responsibly lead the transition of adult smokers to a smoke-free future. We're moving beyond smoking. And of course, for those adult tobacco consumers who want to quit, we offer access to a breadth of information from experts on how to do so successfully.
Thanks again to Altria for sponsoring today's program. And to dig deeper into how businesses are utilizing technology, I'm pleased to welcome Emily Glassberg-Sands, the head of information at Stripe, a financial services company that allows businesses to accept payments, send payouts, and manage businesses online. She leads the company's data science, growth, business applications, and corporate technology teams. Emily has been at the forefront of bringing industries like agricultural and trucking online. Emily, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
Well, tell me first, let's start off with, tell me about Stripe and what changes have you seen in your customer base?
Yeah, well, as you've noted, Stripe's providing financial infrastructure for the internet economy. So we have millions of businesses from Lyft to your local plumber that are operating on Stripe. And we see a really wide swath of the internet economy as a result and how it's evolving over time. You know, I think the pandemic boom of the internet economy was real and strong, you know, with stores shuttering and businesses increasingly moving online. In 2020, we saw about 1,400 new companies enrolling with Stripe every single day. Now that huge boom of growth in the online economy is starting to cool, but growth definitely continues. Our rates of growth are still about 40% higher than pre-pandemic levels, and some really interesting trends with fast growth in rural economies, in traditionally offline industries moving online. And we're also seeing a really central role that platforms are playing in supporting small businesses in successfully making that transition.
You know, regarding the pandemic, and obviously it's been a crazy time and it's not quite over yet, but can you describe a little bit about how clients and businesses said, we really need to get online, and how they realized, wow, maybe we should have done this a long time ago, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, I love agriculture, just to choose an industry, because it could have been hit so much harder by COVID. And it instead really used the COVID period as an opportunity to build resiliency by moving online. And we're seeing it come out stronger and more modern as an industry as a result. So, you know, we have thousands of U.S. agricultural businesses collectively processing over $1 billion annually through Stripe. To give you a sense of sort of the growth trajectory, over the last 2 years, more than 2,000 of those U.S. ag businesses doubled their payments volume. And, you know, I think there are really a key enabler in this is both the digital infrastructure that allows them to move online, but also platforms who come in and solve problems industry by industry. So in the case of agriculture, for example, Barn to Door and Ambrook stand out as two platforms that are helping thousands of farmers use new financial infrastructure and move this traditional offline industry into really modern and sustainable business models. So Barn to Door provides ready-to-go online stores for food producers. And this means really a whole new revenue stream. It makes it really simple for farmers to get their products directly in the hands of consumers. And that's not going anywhere.
And you mentioned the ag and trucking industries. I mean, you know, change is tough, right? I mean, if you've been doing business a certain way, what were the obstacles, or have been the obstacles that you face in convincing people this is the right way to go?
Yeah, you know, I think there can be sort of a knee-jerk reaction that e-commerce is e-commerce and it's really for the online or digital native sector. And I don't actually think that's what we're seeing in the data, or that's what we're seeing in the world. In fact, I think more and more traditional industries are recognizing the opportunity to move online. And that doesn't necessarily mean their full business moves online, but they can still be enabled by digital financial infrastructure. So, you know, trucking is an interesting example because, you know, trucking is sort of the opposite of what you would think of as e-commerce, maybe even more so than farming. And yet we're seeing our digital infrastructure be adopted actively and really help trucking companies, grow revenues and solve longstanding inefficiencies and build resilience. So just to give you a sense of some of the inefficiencies I'm talking about in trucking in the past, you know, there were payments to unload trucks. Previously had to be made in person, and that could mean, you know, waiting hours. delays unloading and underutilization of fleets as a result. There's obviously in trucking the need to find loads to haul that fit the most optimal route. Getting as many jobs into a single day's work as possible is obviously important for utilization of fleets. And then just getting paid and having efficient cash flow and making sure drivers have the cash on hand to refuel or repair their trucks so they can quite literally stay on the road. And all that sounds very brick and mortar, very sort of internet independent. But what we've seen actually is now increasingly online, trucking businesses are solving a lot of these problems, these cash flow challenges, these cost challenges, and getting more access to customers. So Mothership is one example that I love. It's a platform built on Stripe that enables truckers to get paid faster. So it used to be that carriers would do sort of paperwork like invoices or billing. They would slip them underneath warehouse doors. And Mothership uses Stripe Connect to pay drivers really quickly without paperwork. And there are a number of other examples in the trucking industry. But this is really about increasing revenue and driving down costs and doing it just when truckers and all of the consumers who benefit from their work need it the most. So yeah, whether farmers or truckers or restaurants, really entire industries are waking up to the value of the internet and finding new resiliency with these online financial services.
When a company decides, okay, we're going to make this switch, we're going to go online, what can you give me a little bit behind the scenes, the nuts and bolts of that, how long that takes to set it up, and also then to feel the fruits of that switch and the economic impact of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the short answer is very quickly. So businesses every day go on to stripe.com and they sign up for an account and they can be accepting payments online in the very same day. We are sort of known for payments. Payments was our first act, but increasingly our strategy is to become a one-stop shop for the payments and financial tools that businesses need to succeed in the face of a rapidly shifting economy. And so we're taking that ability to accept payments sort of same day and extending it to other offerings, including a lot in the sort of banking as a service space. So Capital is one of my favorite examples. This is really about providing access to fast and flexible financing so that businesses can manage cash flows and invest in growth and get started on all of that much more quickly than through traditional loan mechanisms, which is really valuable in these volatile times.
Emily, can you just talk specifically about small businesses? Over the years, there's been debate on what is a small business, but I would imagine smaller firms are like, well, we don't need to do that, or maybe pre-pandemic at least made that case. How many small businesses do you work with, and is there, do you think that even the smallest of businesses really could use some type of transformation here to move into the 21st century?
Absolutely. I mean, so the answer is we work with millions of small businesses, and the rate of growth for small businesses has been tremendous as they seek to access a broader set of customers, be resilient in the face of the current economic climate, as well as sort of COVID over the last couple of years. And these businesses are not just small, they're everywhere. So a lot of the growth we're seeing is taking place outside of Silicon Valley and outside of large cities. To give you a sense, the US has literally hundreds of cities today with businesses on Stripe collectively processing more than 100 million annually. And in the case of small businesses, we're actually seeing between 2019 and present, small businesses running online in rural communities have grown their contribution to US GDP about a third faster than small businesses in urban communities. So tons of small businesses using Stripe, some using us directly, many using us through the platform partners that I mentioned earlier. And those small businesses, aren't isolated to large cities, aren't isolated to tech hubs. They really are across the U.S. and helping revitalize rural communities.
My last question, deals with broadband, and everyone on the East Coast thinks everyone in the country has great internet. So I want to ask you specifically about rural parts of the country and the challenges there. Are you able to go into those parts of the country, and also do you run into some internet problems?
So I wouldn't say in the case of the U.S. that access to internet has been a major impediment to our ability to serve users. You don't need a super high-speed connection. You can process a bunch of stuff directly from 3G or 4G or 5G on your phone, and so that hasn't to date been an impediment. But I'm actually from Bozeman, Montana, and the house I grew up in doesn't have great internet, so I'm well aware that there's still progress to be made in terms of internet access across the U.S., and I think that'll open a bunch more equality across locations. But in the case of Stripe in particular, we haven't seen that as an impediment to businesses lighting up online.
Emily Glassberg-Sands, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your input today.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
And that brings us to the end of our second segment of A More Perfect Union. Thanks again to our sponsor, Altria, for supporting today's program. Please join us back here tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern for our third and final segment, Consensus Builders, where we'll discuss the growing political divide and how we might disrupt this notion and find the missing middle. We'll be joined by former Congressman David Jolly, Ryan Clancy from No Labels, and more. See you back here tomorrow at 1 p.m. Till then, I'm Bob Cusack. Thanks for joining us.